Hello, so this video is the first in our series Aliens and Strangers, where we're going to be looking at the exile period in the Bible. The exile is when the Jewish people were brought out of their land and transported to another land. And a lot of people don't realise, but many different biblical characters were actually around during this period, and a lot of their stories come from this time. So we're looking at the period between 600 BC and 420 BC, obviously BC standing for before Christ. So before we do that, let's look at the context of the rulers around at this time. So the very famous first ruler that takes Israel famously off into exile is Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. Then after him we have a few other rulers that come from Babylon, but then another empire comes in under Cyrus, or Cyrus the Great. The ones I'm leaving blank are because they're not as important in the stories, although some of them are mentioned. Then we have another famous ruler, Darius the Great. Then we have Xerxes, remember these are from Persia now, after Cyrus overthrew the Babylonians, and then Artaxerxes. So there's some of the rulers at the time, and some of the stories associated with them is the fiery furnace with Nebuchadnezzar. We have Darius the Mede, who we shouldn't confuse with Darius the Great, who is under Cyrus. Either it's the same, another name for him, or someone different, and it's under this that we get Daniel in the Lion's Den. And then Xerxes is actually the king that Queen Esther ends up marrying. So that's some of the context. Then let's start filling in the timeline. So right at the beginning in 605, we're going to be colour coding different events with the highlighters. So this is a personal one, so it's going to be in yellow. We have Daniel actually being taken captive into Babylon. And then very similarly, and right after this, we have another famous biblical character which you might not realise was taken in captive, which is Ezekiel the prophet was actually taken captive to Babylon also, just after Daniel. And then right after this, in 589, Jerusalem actually officially falls. So the city was already kind of captive at this point, people were being exiled, but then it got completely destroyed in 589, remember, under King Nebuchadnezzar. But then a few years later, in 556, the blue is symbolising political things that happened. Babylon actually falls to a new empire, which is the Persian Empire, which is led by Cyrus, and this is where we also have Darius the Mede that I mentioned before. Then in 539 we have an important decree that is made by Cyrus, and what this actually does is it allows the people to return back to the land for the first time. So obviously they've been in exile for a long period of time, but then Cyrus allows them under a leader called Zerubbabel to return. Now the return happens in different stages, and annoyingly I haven't written it in short, but it says that it's the first return under Zerubbabel. But then a few years later, and the reason that they didn't all return at once is because the work was stopped. There was a lot of people that didn't like the Jewish people and wanted to stop them returning to their land, and so the work was stopped in 530. But then a few years later we have a couple of prophets that come along by the name of Zechariah and Haggai. And what they do is they prophesy and say to the people, you need to get on and start building the temple. The temple needs to take priority. And so what follows that in 520 is another decree, but this time from the ruler of the time, Darius. Interestingly, the people didn't wait for a decree to come from a ruler at this time. They followed what the prophet said, and God honoured them for that by this decree coming. And then in 516, after many years of work, the temple in Jerusalem is rebuilt. So this is a very, very significant event for the Jewish people returning to their land at this time. And then we have a bit of a period of nothingness, but then long away back in exile, a queen, a Jewish queen named Esther, who we've already mentioned, married to Xerxes, manages to save her people, the Jews, from annihilation from an evil guy called Haman who wanted to kill them. So she saves them. Now you can see a couple of question marks around this date 458. That's because in the year 458 we have another decree by the ruler after Xerxes, Artaxerxes, who enables the Jewish people to start building again. But either before or after that, we have a decree from the same ruler, Artaxerxes, to stop the work again. So the work keeps getting stopped by Israel's enemies, who were trying to persuade the rulers of whether it's Babylon or Persia to stop the work. But then after Artaxerxes' decree, we have the second wave that go back under the leader Ezra, and he really sorts out the spiritual things of the people to get them ready spiritually. And then we have the third and final wave under Nehemiah, who builds the walls of Jerusalem.